Welcome to Summit University. Today our guest is Steven Acuff. He's a best-selling author and lecturer on health and diet in Europe and the United States. Mr. Acuff specializes in the macrobiotic diet. He is an instructor at the Cushy Institutes in Massachusetts and a nutritional counselor at a medical clinic in Germany. He is also director of a macrobiotic center in Sweden. Mr. Acuff is here today to talk about Oriental Diagnosis.
We'll start off with this first session now, dealing with your questions. And if you have any further comments, if the question doesn't seem to be answered adequately, it is possible to raise your hand and come to the side here and get some clarification. But I will tend to answer the questions quickly because it's easy to spend 10 or 15 minutes on one question if we go into it very thoroughly. So to answer as many questions as possible, I will try to keep it short, in any case, in most cases. I certainly appreciate all the questions. It shows that you have a very active interest, and I don't think I've ever had such an appreciative audience as I've experienced in this course. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm sure that many of you will make very constructive use of the information you've gathered in the last couple of days. So we'll go right into the questions now. And the first question, start on a light note, very grateful here to the person who asked me if I have talked to my mother-in-law about my attitude towards her pickiness. Because, as it says here, maybe I have a kidney problem if I haven't. So that's great. We'd say this person certainly has a good liver. So, I have addressed the subject of pickiness with her, but in a more, let's say, a fleeting manner, very short. I'm always very careful not to invade people's space too much. You know, there comes a delicate time. You can almost feel when's the time to go into things and when it's not the time. And it's like it's a diplomacy kind of quality that develops in time. Some people don't like to hear that they're out of balance, especially if they have a liver tightness. So we want to always be sure that the information is wanted, is requested, or is desired, so that we don't give people the impression we're invading on their space. But the reason why I playfully said I hope that she doesn't see this is that we can joke about it among ourselves, but knowing that I'd taken her as an example of a tight liver, I don't know how she would feel about that, you know, being brought before a lot of people. If you knew who she was, I probably wouldn't even have mentioned her. Okay, so that was a nice light beginning. Now we'll go into some of the more serious stuff. So we'll go right into some of these things here. Number one is eyesight. I was asked about eyesight also in the breaks and yesterday in our sessions with group work. Now, eyesight in general is related to the liver. That's just a general consideration. But there's something which we call farsightedness, which develops with age. Like it comes about your mid-40s. You notice as you're reading things that your arms are not long enough anymore. Look at those things, you keep going out, and then you can read it. Now that's a very common thing that happens. The lens in your eye has a very good flexible quality, and when you're young, if your eyes are not otherwise out of balance, you'll have this flexibility, so there's good adjustment. As you get older, this flexibility drops down to maybe only a quarter of what it was before. So it's very typical for people to get farsightedness in their 40s. So if you have that, that's kind of the regular course of getting older. You can do something about eyesight problems, whether they're short-sighted or far-sighted problems. Far-sighted problems are generally what we call more yang. It's the way the eye also develops. Aside from the stiffness that may develop in the 40s, some people becoming far-sighted earlier than that, we would think about the eye becoming more yang, and it has to do with the way the light refracts against the retina. And short-sightedness is the opposite. It tends to be more yin. Now, if you'd like to read more about these kind of things, because I'm not going to go into detail all these things, you might want to read a couple of books. Michio Kushi has been the inspiration for much of the macrobiotic information about health, and he has a book called Natural Healing Through Macrobiotics, and where these kind of things are discussed. If you're interested especially in the subject of cancer, which I also got some questions, you should read the book called The Cancer Prevention Diet, which gives you a very good overview of how we deal with the problem of cancer, by Michio Kushi. It's a very thick book, but you don't have to read the whole book. You read the introduction and then the chapter that deals with the cancer that applies to you. So it's not such a big project. And then you know where the cancer comes from, and there's also a case history of someone who has recovered from that kind of cancer at the end of that chapter, to give you a little inspiration to go on. And I do know people who have recovered from terminal cancer through macrobiotics. So in any case, you'll want to get more information through books. And I was asked some questions about what information is there, bibliography. A lot of the things I've told you have come out of my combination of study and experience. I studied with Michio Kushi, but I've been practicing for many years, and some of the things you don't find in books. It just is there. It kind of comes with time. So we learn, on the one hand, from knowledge that we get out of books. The other hand, we learn from experience, and we try to learn from the experience of others. So as you expand your knowledge in this, you'll learn also from your own experience. So back to the eyesight then, that you can read about it in different books about what causes this. You can read about what causes glaucoma, which is a very yin condition when the pressure inside the eye gets very great and can be very dangerous to eyesight. I've seen cases of glaucoma get better with macrobiotics because we cut out the yin excess, which has caused all of this pressure from inside. It's an expansion, and you need to contract that again. I got a lot of questions that are asking about specific symptoms, and what we always try to do is put on the yin-yang spectacles and see what would we say about this. I was asked a question about diarrhea. I've asked questions about constipation, questions about all kinds of health problems, and if we try to keep the yin-yang perspective, then we can experiment with a good background. So diarrhea, which is, of course, too much looseness, lacking in firmness in the intestines, we would assume is in general a yin problem, generally speaking. So if someone is eating macrobiotically and still experiencing this, we would say eat more yang foods. In other words, greater portion of grains, somewhat less vegetables. Be careful with things like sauerkraut, because they're more yin. It's very good, of course. Sauerkraut is a wonderful food. But if that's your problem, then think about what is yin. Think about the amount of liquid you're drinking. So, eyesight is influenced by what we eat, of course, because blood quality determines our biological composition. But then from the outside, we can also do things. Many of you have heard of the Bates method, I'm sure. The Bates method of overcoming sight problems. Better Eyesight Without Glasses, I think is the name of his book. There is a small firm in Wisconsin which also makes the pinhole glasses. Some of you may be familiar with those. They're these dark glasses and they have rows of pinholes. And I have practiced with these because I am now in my mid-40s and have this farsightedness that comes. And I find that when I use these pinhole glasses, that my eyesight improves. It's only temporary, but you're supposed to continue regularly. And by regularly using these, every day practicing with them, you can read books with them, you can do all kinds of things. You don't drive cars with them, though. And then you can let your eyes practice. This firm calls their glasses aerobic glasses because they're supposed to give your eyes training as if you were doing aerobics. And it feels like that a little bit. Your eyes feel like you're using some parts of your eyes you don't normally use. Your eye is focusing on the glass and then also on what you're looking at through there. And amazingly, it gives you very clear sight. You can read very small print with these, regardless of what kind of eyes you've got. So I can recommend those, and if you're interested in the address, I can make that available to you. So I would say let's take it from the inside and outside. With the food, by either going with more yin or more yang foods, depending on which side your sight problem is coming from, and then in any case, look for some kind of outside exercise to do. If you read the Book of Do-In by Michio Kushi, a book which describes macrobiotics beyond the subject of food, with different meditations, chanting, you'll even recognize some of the chants, and there is an exercise for strengthening the eyes, in which you hold your hands over your eyes and you make quick movements, left and right, up and down, diagonal, and rotating. Maybe 10 of each one, and you can feel that you're using muscles, your eyes feel more flexible. So that's that question. Then I had several questions about problems with mucus in the throat and the sinuses, different parts of the body. Some people talked about having clogged ears and wondered what is causing that if you're eating macrobiotically. Well, first of all, if you're not eating macrobiotically, the cause is very obvious. Number one cause is dairy food, milk products. If you stop dairy food, the mucus accumulations in your air passages, in your sinuses, will decrease rapidly and noticeably. But for some people who are eating macrobiotically and still having the problem, our recommendation would be to stay away from baked flour. Before I lecture, I really don't like to eat bread or any kind of flour product because I can feel it get stuck in my throat too. I spend more time clearing my throat than speaking if I eat bread before a lecture. And it may be difficult to understand exactly how this happens, but it does happen. And when we bake flour, we have to, number one, be sure we chew it very well. People are better at chewing whole grains than they are bread, because the grinding of the flour takes away the need for good chewing on the one hand. On the other hand, we still have the need for the chewing because we have to biochemically change the grains in the mouth through the mixture with saliva. So even if you don't have the resistance that you would have with the whole grains, be sure to chew your food very well. Of course, this is a recommendation which is important for everybody at all times, but especially those of you, and there were several, who asked about mucus accumulations, of having mucus blockages forming in the throat. Be careful of these things. Now, bread is not the worst. I'm just mentioning it because it's something that is a general part of good macrobiotic food. Most people would not be happy in the long run if they didn't eat bread, has been my experience. We have a long bread tradition in our culture, and people enjoy it. So this is really a question of, if you're having problems with mucus, then you think about that. But even more important than bread are things like cookies and cake and hard-baked things like that. They're much more blocking than bread. But if you find that leaving those out is not enough, then let's include the bread on the avoid list, at least for a while. In the end, your own personal experience should decide what's right. No one can make the decision better than you can. We come with our suggestions, but we're never really able to say exactly that this will be right. In the end, the person decides himself what functions best. Then I was asked a question about liver hardness. I mentioned about liver being hard and liver being expanded. There was some confusion about the liver there. In generally, when the liver expands, this is a yin thing. It's taking on a lot of fat cells. Fat is more yin. The liver then becomes hard because it's swelling up a little bit like a balloon getting tense. So it becomes hard. So if you feel the liver and you can't even get under the rib cage, this is a more expanded yin hardness. If you get a little bit under there, but then you just hit a piece of concrete there somewhere, then this is more yang hardness. It's just getting very hard but not taking on so much volume. And for some people, maybe both. I was also asked questions of how to detox the liver, especially if you've taken drugs, both illegal and prescription drugs. The best way to treat the liver well is to detox it is to, I've mentioned it earlier, think about making a pollution-free environment for yourself, especially in your bedroom when you're sleeping. Most important place to have a toxin-free environment. And if you can't get rid of the toxic things, artificial materials, synthetic carpets, then don't sleep with closed windows, even in the winter. And then to detox the liver, very good is the shiitake mushroom, which we recommend often for discharging purposes, for breaking down heavy animal fats. The shiitake mushroom really melts it away. You can even make a tea out of shiitake. You just soak the shiitake mushroom, you boil it in water, and maybe 15, 20 minutes till you have a good shiitake liquid, and drink that. If you take that in the winter, you may experience sudden coldness because it is a very cooling drink. It's excellent for breaking a fever, especially in children. I know several women who have saved themselves trips to the hospital with feverish children just by giving them a shiitake tea. Very quick, very effective. But if you feel you get very cold from it, then maybe you should just stay with the shiitake mushrooms in their whole form and don't drink the tea. The tea, of course, is more yin because it's liquid, so it's stronger. Then another mushroom which is very good is called reishi, R-E-I-S-H-I, which basically means divine mushroom in Japanese, or the lingzi, L-I-N-G-Z-H-I, is what the Chinese call it. This mushroom is also excellent for detoxing the liver. And in general, be careful with heavy fat things. If you like to eat nut butters, this will make the liver sluggish again. So in a time when you're doing liver detox, as we call it sometimes, think about controlling your fat and oil consumption. Then there was a question about vaginal discharge. If this is any sign of a problem. It's usually a sign of a problem if the color goes towards dark yellow and towards green. If it's just more a clear mucus or lightly white, it's usually not a problem. It's more we could call it an adaptive process. It's not good if it's white in the sense of like just forget about it, but it's nothing to really be concerned about. It's just a discharge. The body has some excess in discharging it. When the color becomes darker, then it's time to do some very consistent macrobiotic therapy to get rid of those excesses which have now become more extreme. So it is a sign of a problem, as the question asked. And also questions of infertility, what to do about infertility. It was interesting, 20 years ago, my wife was declared by doctors to be infertile. And we now have 3 daughters. So obviously, a state of infertility is not static, but rather it is a result of what you're doing with your body. Now, animal quality food, especially dairy food, is very clogging to the fallopian tubes, to the ovaries, to the whole female area. And a woman who wants to have a child should not take these foods. And if she is now experiencing difficulties and thinks maybe she's infertile, then she should do a real cleansing program. Cleansing would be things like the shiitake mushroom, also hip baths, which you can find out how to do those by talking to people here on the staff. Those are very good. But an interesting thing is also some women will think they're infertile, and in reality it's the man who's the problem. The sperm count of men has dropped drastically in this century. I've read the study and shows that it's a remarkable drop in sperm count. And if the sperm count goes below a certain number, then it's actually the man who is the problem. Some men don't want to get checked because they feel that their integrity is being challenged or questioned, and they don't like that. But if there are some problems with infertility, it might be a good idea to think about both sides, male and female. Women need excess in a certain way to get pregnant. So when I talk about getting rid of excess, I mean the excesses from the wrong kinds of food, and my experience has shown me definitely that dairy food is the #1 cause of infertility in women. In Sweden, it is a big problem. There are lots of adopted children from the third world in Sweden. Look at almost any class photo, a school class, and you'll see 1 or more children from the third world there, because Swedes are adopting because the infertility rate has gone up very much. And when I look at the women who are infertile, I see a lot of excesses there, lots of excesses, and it's a lot of dairy food, #1. So the kind of excess I'm talking about is having a certain amount of excess in the body generally, that you don't get too thin, in other words. Some women will become very thin when they eat good food because they have generally more yin constitutions. So they lose it faster than women with yang constitutions. Now, if a woman gets very thin, she probably will tend to be infertile. So there should be a certain amount of richness in the food. Now, don't get too much fixated into only discharging and getting rid of things. You know, that's important if you've got excess, but if you've been eating good food for a while, you may have to switch your perspective from getting rid of excess to supplying richness and support and strength. I was asked some questions about Candida. I spoke shortly about this subject in our last session. And I would suggest that you talk to the resident dietitian here who is well versed in what you do about those things. She can help you out and take care of those problems for you. So I won't go into that anymore since I talked about that. And while we're on the subject of our last examination up here on the stage, I was asked a question if mochi, which is sweet rice, if that is also a good way, a prepared pounded sweet rice, if that is also a good way for someone like this young woman who is up here to overcome these feelings of hunger after a quarter of an hour. And the answer is yes, mochi is also good. It is higher in protein. It's a richer food, and when you eat it, you can feel satiation much faster. So what we might do is take sweet rice and cook it half and half with oats or with some other grain. Or we can take it in the pounded form as mochi. Very delicious. Interesting always, women seem to be especially big fans of mochi. All women, Swedish women, American women. Then about how do you get off of coffee? Oh, that's a big problem. How do you get off of coffee? The question is always, why are you drinking coffee? Because that will give you some insight. Some people are drinking it because they feel like they're going to black out if they don't. And in fact, in a critical situation, coffee may be the right thing to do, because a blackout is certainly worse. But then we want to go beyond that. Want to get beyond both coffee and the blackouts. So what we have found works well in general in our clinic, because we have a lot of people coming into our clinic in Germany, patients who are suffering from low blood pressure. I was also asked a lot of questions about low blood pressure. Low blood pressure is too yin. Things are too expanded. You can only get pressure in those veins if you've got a certain amount of resilience and firmness. But if everything's getting yin and loose, heart, blood vessels, there's no resistance to build up that pressure. So it's generally a strong yin condition. So people will take coffee because the artificial stimulation will bridge over that. But it's still a problem. So in our clinic, we have organic green tea, which is called sencha, S-E-N-C-H-A. Sencha is a very mild stimulant, milder than coffee, and many of our patients tell us that they do well on that. So that can be a bridge over. If you occasionally have it, that's fine. Other people may have strong reactions to it. It may be too yin for them, so they may have to do something else. Some people reduce the amount of coffee they're drinking by taking half coffee and half grain coffee, or half chicory and half coffee. And they're able to have their morning cup of coffee, but getting less and less caffeine all the time. Those who are drinking coffee because of the taste should really experiment with the different alternatives there are that have very strong bitter taste. Everyone, or most people, are attracted to the bitter taste. And we don't have it much in our food. You know, bitter taste is lacking. If you get bitter things in your food, like dandelion roots, dandelion leaves, chicory, if you have the bitter taste in the food, you'll be less attracted to coffee just for its taste. There's grain coffee and all these alternatives. That's usually not so much a problem. It's just finding out more information about what is the alternative. Now, as far as getting caffeine out of your body, which was another question someone asked, we would think about the liver again. The liver is our major detox organ. The detoxing system in the body is an important part of the immune system. And the liver is always in the middle of the picture. So whether it's a matter of getting rid of drugs, all kinds, of getting rid of caffeine, or any other strong stimulant to the central nervous system, supporting the liver is the way we go. You may be attracted to some kind of homeopathic or some other kind of natural things. I've been asked also here in these questions from you about what is the attitude towards homeopathy, or how about taking herbs or supplements. Because I mentioned earlier that people will have difficulty absorbing mineral tablets because of the tremendous concentration, and that they don't take it up as well as through the food. This was speaking generally. I am not an opponent of mineral therapy when it's called for. In macrobiotics, we can say it's a very simple process. What we do is this. When we have problems, our first question is, what can I do now to eliminate this problem? So we do that. And that means, how can I change my food around? How can I take other things that I know about out of my experience? What kind of physical exercise or mental or spiritual practices can help me? And then we see how it goes. If you don't seem to make any progress, then it's only logical that you start looking somewhere else, asking people who have experience, either professionals or just experienced people in other areas. And you may come to homeopathy, you may come to Chinese herbs, and all these are very valuable things. There was a time back in the early 70s when macrobiotics was a very naive teaching. The teaching was basically that just figure it out through the food. That is the only natural source of our vitality, and everything else is unnatural input. And this is very naive because often that just doesn't suffice. So through the years, the experience showed that you have to go beyond that. I never was really an enthusiastic supporter of those ideas because Chinese herbal teas I already discovered very early in the 70s through my contact to Noboru Muramoto, a well-known Japanese macrobiotic teacher in California who has become the instigator of American-grown umeboshi salt plums. There are actually California umeboshi plums, thanks to Mr. Muramoto. So his herbal tea wisdom I found to be very supportive for macrobiotic therapies, and I still recommend them today. I've mentioned them a couple of times already, and you can get the address of where you can order the Muramoto teas here from the staff. So we go to the step of working now with alternatives like homeopathy or anything. It can be kinesiology. You know, the sky's the limit. There's all kinds of things. Just we're living in an age when the human potential is really unfolding, you know, for better and for worse. And we can take advantage of all these new wonderful things that are being discovered. And then if that still isn't working, then it's time to think about more radical methods. We may have to also settle for conventional medical treatments. We may have to take operations or some other kind of treatment, antibiotics. Those are sometimes necessary. But we exhaust the other possibilities first, if at all in the realm of the possible. So in other words, it's just common sense. And we get into trouble only when we get dogmatic. Say, macrobiotics don't go to doctors. That kind of mentality will get you into trouble. In fact, it's very good advice to everyone to check out the selection of doctors before you need one, because if something happens quickly, you then don't have to go through the telephone book and try to find out who has an attitude which is more open to your standpoint. You already know who to contact. And doctors can be, at the right moment, extremely valuable persons. So, then there was a question about allergies. How do you deal with allergies? Allergies are a disturbance of the immune system. And I've also asked questions about the immune system. How do you strengthen the immune system? Allergies are problems of the immune system and have often to do with overreactions. The antibodies and the immune cells that we have working for us tend to get overreactive and do too much. That's more what's happening with allergies. So what you do is take away that which overstimulates the immune system. In other words, overstimulating in the sense of provoking it to a strong reaction. Within food, there is nothing more provocative for the immune system than milk protein. Milk protein is highly indigestible, and when these milk protein molecules get into your blood, they will push you in the direction of an allergic reaction. The question is whether or not your body can cope with that, or whether or not it gets out of balance totally and becomes an allergic reaction. Now, I was also asked a question about babies. How about an allergic baby on macrobiotics? The woman is eating macrobiotic food. The baby is showing some signs of reactions to macrobiotic foods, even her breast milk. So here we would say that one of the problems that can happen with babies is if they get too much soy products, there can be an allergic reaction. Soy products are not always so easily digestible for babies, and giving them soy milk as a substitute for cow's milk can also produce allergic reactions. Grain milk is better, and you can put a teaspoon or so of almond butter, which is very high in calcium, into the grain milk and use that as a substitute. We have also the recipe for this grain milk here. If you're interested, you can just contact the people that run the kitchen. But how would it happen then also that a macrobiotic baby could become allergic? One problem is too much repetition. The best way to stop allergic tendencies is to have variety. Some of you may know about the standard allergic diet called the rotation diet. When people are suffering from allergies, they get the standard rotation diet, which means you eat at the most every 4 days the same thing. You don't eat 2 days in a row the same thing, and first later. So every 4 days you can take it, but not any more often, and that will soothe this overreacting immune system again. So variety in the grains, variety in vegetables, that's the best way of dealing with it. There might be some other things going on. You might check the general environment of the baby. Some babies are being exposed to toxins without the parents knowing it. They may be playing a lot on synthetic carpets, which are outgassing formaldehyde. The baby may be down there with his nose, in the carpet, getting a big dose of formaldehyde. So think about the whole picture, and especially this time of year, have the baby outside as much as possible. The outside air is, of course, much better than inside air and will reduce allergy tendencies. Then I was asked a question about fasting. Fasting is what people like to do when they spend the rest of the year eating too much. So they eat excess, and then they fast, and they eat excess, and they fast. So in general, we don't recommend that because we're eating good foods. Now, there is one exception. That is when you're doing it for spiritual purposes. Because fasting has, for a long time, been a common practice in many esoteric religions. And it has a purpose, because think about what happens. Let's take one example. You eat a big Christmas dinner at your family's house, with animal food, a turkey or whatever, and lots of sauces and gravies and things. And at the end of this meal, you even have to unbuckle your belt a little bit because it's pretty heavy. And think about your mental state at this time. Do you feel now that you are one with the universe? If we remember from our diagnosis before, the nervous system and the digestive system are opposites. And when you overstimulate the digestive system, this means that you draw energy from the nervous system. Now, the nervous system is our antenna to higher levels of energy. So overeating, stuffing ourselves, feasting is a good way to block off this energy because we're just overstimulating our digestive system, so we're pulling it away from the nervous system, and we can feel it. After a big, heavy meal, we don't feel really sharp. Then we have the other one. That is, if you just skip over a meal. For those who aren't very thin and have that kind of excess, try that sometime. The best fasting is to just skip your evening meal. Eat breakfast and lunch, and then eat breakfast again. You'll find that when you wake up the next morning, after not having eaten anything since lunch, you wake up feeling better than you felt in a long time. Most people. The hypoglycemics maybe as an exception, because blood sugar problems can maybe get in the way. But for many people, this is a very eye-opening experience. You discover that eating less makes you feel better, and you understand why in the religious traditions of both East and West, fasting has its place. So that's what we're talking about. If you mean fasting just to get rid of toxins, I would say that's okay if you feel good doing it. But if you have a yin constitution, like the last woman we had up here, if she would do a fast, even aside from her blood sugar disturbances, a fast for her would not really be the right thing. When you have a yang constitution, that means more compact bone structure. These people make it with the fast better. And it's amazing how such simple things slip the eye of conventional doctors. I know a doctor who has been experimenting a lot with fasting with cancer patients. He says it's very interesting. Some of the people seem to really blossom when they fast, and other people get wobbly knees from it. And I don't understand. If he had an eye for constitution, he would see the wobbly knees are very often the people with yin constitutions. And the others, these really compact, strong bone structure people, they just breeze through a 10-day fast, feeling really good. So fasting is something that definitely has its place, but should be used with caution. I have seen cases of people having colic type of attacks, like real, almost like gallstone attacks by fasting and releasing too much toxin at one time. So then I was asked a question about acne in general. It's a fat excess, so less fat, especially teenagers who have more acne problems should be careful with the amount of fat they eat. Now, fat doesn't just mean oil on your vegetables, but some people will eat very oil-free food and then eat chocolate. Now, chocolate, it contains palm oil. It's one of the heaviest oils around, and it's used for chocolate because it gives it that real thick, gooey quality. So if you do cut down your oil, then really do it, and don't just leave out the healthy oil and then take the unhealthy oil as a substitute. Then one person was asked a question of, how about just in the jaw area? So this is kind of interesting. How about if you just get acne along here? Now, when I think of the acupuncture meridians, we have coming up on the sides here, we have in this area the intestine meridian, large intestine meridian. And I'm not exactly sure which part of the jaw was meant, but if I had it in here, I would immediately think about intestines. I would try to do some intestinal cleaning, maybe a couple of days of eating only brown rice, so-called number 7 diet, which has been called. A couple of days of eating only brown rice with some sesame seeds on it, and then drinking tea, bancha tea. That is a good way of getting a clean out. So then there's a question about some serious illnesses like multiple sclerosis. I even had 3 questions about multiple sclerosis. And it's interesting that in a group of this size, we got 3 questions about this. It's a disease which is increasing. Medical science has no answer. The only thing they can really do is give you cortisone and try to postpone the development of the disease, but everybody pays a price for cortisone therapy. I have seen good improvement, and I've even seen healing success with macrobiotics in MS. It's not an easy one, and it depends on how early you get into it. If the person is already sitting in a wheelchair, this is usually has gone too far to get a full recovery. But if it's the first weakness in the legs, this can be affected. Now, I'm not going to go into it in detail. I have planned a further discussion planned for tomorrow, in which I'm going to take up the subject of degenerative disease. I'm going to talk about MS more then. So for those who would like to know more about it, I would say check that out, and I won't spend more time on it now. But in general, I can say, yes, you can do something about it. Number one cause of MS is what overstimulates the immune system? Dairy food. So, also a couple of questions about Parkinson's. Parkinson's disease, which is a shaking. The two have something in common. They're both degenerations of the nervous system. And if we follow the macrobiotic model of disease progression, these two diseases are extremely difficult because this is last stage degeneration. This is when it goes the furthest. It's interesting to think about the human nervous system. This is what we call the crown of creation. The human nervous system is the pinnacle of creative ingenuity. And when the human nervous system is sick, you have the deepest sicknesses there is, and that's why these two problems also are dismal failures with normal medical therapies. I have seen also incredible recoveries with Parkinson's, including a man who is a professional actor in Germany who was on the verge of stopping his career because of the shaking. He had sometimes to play a role on the stage where he would fall over dead and had to lie still. Very difficult, when you have Parkinson's. So he began with this macrobiotic food. It didn't get any better. And he came back and he said, "It's just not getting better." I said, "Well, this is a yin problem. Are you still taking some extreme yin?" He says, "No, I'm doing everything you said, except," and now it comes. At the end of a performance, we always drink champagne to celebrate. And I just drank one little glass of champagne with my friends from the theater. I don't want to be left out, but that's all. And when he stopped this one little glass of champagne, his shaking became remarkably less. It was very amazing what one little glass of champagne could do. Of course, they were playing nightly. You see, this was not just once a week. Then I was asked some questions about cancer. Cancer is also a very serious illness. I wish I had the time to speak to everyone who has this disease because there's a lot you can do. And I've had many, many people with cancer, and I've seen a lot of benefit. I also plan to talk about cancer during the discussion tomorrow on degenerative disease. So in general, I would just say this, that what people say, what can I do about cancer? What you have to do is strengthen the immune system. There is no medical therapy which really effectively deals with most of the cancers today. Medical therapies do nothing more than offer the people a straw to hang on to, and in some cases give temporary relief of pain. But my experience has been that cancer therapies are very unsatisfactory, and that most people don't realize how ineffective they are. When chemotherapy was introduced in the 50s, they had to almost twist people's arms to take it. People say, "I'm not going to take something that's toxic." Makes my hair fall out and makes all of my mucous membranes inflame and gives me chronic nausea. But as the years went by, people's hesitation was gradually eroded so that people today very lightheartedly take it. And when I tell people to be careful, they usually tell me, well, my doctor's just giving me a light chemo. Light chemo, it's like a light Bud Light. It's just not enough. You know, these are really heavy chemicals, whether they're light or heavy. And you should be very clear about what they do. Anyone who has cancer must go to a library and read everything they can find out about this subject. You'll discover that there is no medical verification that chemotherapy lengthens life by one single day. That's pretty incredible when you think that 99% of tumor cancer patients are being given this. And when you understand the macrobiotic perspective, which is that we want to give the person maximum life quality with maximum life expectancy, then you know that chemotherapy should only be used in very outsider kind of situations, exception kind of situations. Just in some cases, maybe it's called for. The routine use of it is certainly not called for, and you will do yourself a big favor if you inform yourself before and not when the side effects start hitting you. So, the kind of program you need for cancer you can read about in the cancer prevention diet. You may, however, need to adjust that. What Michio Kushi describes in the cancer prevention diet is a program that you can generally use as your, let's call it your base camp. But don't just strictly adhere to what you see in a book. You really do need to talk to someone who has counseling experience if you're dealing with cancer. Each cancer is a little different. Breast cancer is a little different than prostate cancer, a little different from pancreatic cancer in the basic characteristic of the disease. And generally the food will be similar, but there are some individual things to take into account which can be important. Then we had a question about arthritis and gout. And just quickly, arthritis is also a problem of an overreacting immune system. So we're coming back to dairy food again, but also the nightshades, I've mentioned it before. And gout is so obviously a problem related to food that not even conventional doctors will seriously argue with the idea, which is really something. Imagine, you can have doctors who will, without a blink of an eye, say, yes, food is important here. That's quite a step for them. But it's a uric acid buildup. You know, you don't get uric acid by eating broccoli. So where's all this stuff coming from? Pretty obvious, it's animal food. Why don't we have gout in the third world, and why do we have gout in the industrialized world? Because rich people like to eat rich foods, and that's what gives you gout. In connection with alcohol, because gout is a liver disturbance. So cut out the alcohol. And if you've already cut out the alcohol, then cut out the cheese. Then another quick question. I bruise easily. Another one asked what I do about easily breaking blood vessels. What does that mean if you bruise easily or if your blood vessels break easily? Very yin, that's right, very yin. There's no firmness in your blood vessels. So just the slightest bump, the slightest stress, and it breaks because it's not tight. It's the same thing with nose bleeding. If a very close relative of mine enjoys drinking beer, likes to go with his friends to the pubs and sit around and talk and drink beer, and then suddenly got these unexplainable nosebleeds. As soon as he stopped his nightly trip to the pub, nosebleed stopped. Started going to the pub again, came back. So there was something about the pub that's doing this. What could that be? Then another quick question, my left eyelid droops. Now this can be a very deep constitutional thing. I have seen this happen with babies when they're born already. If we remember the idea of heaven's force and earth's force, left and right sides, the left side is very sensitive to extreme yin. Now, the ability for the eyelid to stay tight where it's supposed to be, is that more yin or yang? That's yang. See, it's staying tight up there. If it loses that and becomes very flaccid, this is too yin. So very easy. Now, whether or not you can do something about it depends on how long you've had it, but in any case, you should try. You should try with getting your food in a more yang-oriented way. Just quickly, for one person who is involved in acupuncture asked me about this question of Earth's force and heaven's force, how that relates to the flow of the acupuncture meridians, because the meridians go up the front side of the body and they go down the back side of the body. Well, this is always very interesting. Our ability to use all these things is dependent on our ability to be able to put all of these patterns on top of each other and see them all going on at the same time. It's like a matrix of all kinds of things, and it's the whole pattern that forms the human being. It's a vibrant energy pattern. Then there was an interesting question about the umeboshi plum, the salt plum, that there in the early 50s already, a Japanese doctor had already shown that the umeboshi plum had very strong antibiotic qualities, and that by using umi extract, which is this umi plum cooked into a thick syrup, dark syrup, that this was very good in dealing with staph infections and dysentery, and also was found to be very good against the tuberculosis bacteria. So, obviously, as also this person correctly assumed, this kind of information never gets very far because you can't really make a lot of money on an ume plum. You know, there's not a lot of profit in it. Antibiotics is big business for big drug companies, and that's why that kind of information never gets coverage or gets known. When I have traveled into parts of the world where people get dysentery, like when I've taken my Asian tours, I am never without this salt plum. I take it every day in both forms, as a salted plum and also as the concentrate. So for me, that's just part of my standard traveling equipment, is about 1 kilo of these plums. It's always interesting to see the way the customs inspectors react to my baggage. I was in Bangladesh last year doing some counseling and some lecturing. Quite an interesting place, Bangladesh. I was the only tourist in the country. And as I was, when I went to the airport to leave the country after a couple of days, I was actually happy to leave. It was not a lot of fun to be there to see the way people live. The customs inspector just looked at me very disapproving. You could see he's not used to seeing people just popping into the country like that, and was asking me what I'd been doing there and what was my religion and all of these things. And he was very scrutinizing. And the doctor who had invited me to Dhaka accompanied me to the control, the customs control, immigration control, and he spoke Bengali to him. So I didn't understand anything except macrobiotic medical expert. Those 3 words I could understand. They were international. And it was interesting how quickly this man, from looking at me like this, he heard this word medical expert, and then he just said, "What can I do about hernia?" So we see there's problems everywhere we go. I couldn't even leave Bangladesh without doing a counseling session. So this should in fact be used as a antiseptic. Try it out if you have problems that look like bacterial infections. In fact, we recommend, just for general purposes, take a little bit of this salt plum every day. It's usually not so enjoyable eaten in its pure form. There are some people that really enjoy that. But it's better to take it as part of your food or in tea, because in the diluted form it's gentler. I'd like to come around to the podium here and you can ask me a question.
just had the question on the umeboshi plum. If it's an antibiotic, does it, like they have candidas and stuff, they say don't take any antibiotics because it kills. Is that a safe antibiotic to take?
If you have candida, yeah, if you have candida, you'll usually react to the umeboshi plum if it's the fermented whole plum, because it's the fermentation. Candida usually reacts very negatively and quickly to fermented products, but ume concentrate goes well because it's not fermented, just cooked into a very thick syrup, and it doesn't taste sweet at all, so it doesn't have that high carbohydrate content. Very sour. Okay, so this is our first session already coming to an end. Let's just take a very quick break of maybe just a few minutes to stretch, and without really too much wandering around, let's get right into it so that we'll still have time for the last sessions, because we do want to keep our time today. Thank you.